Coming up, Tatum tops Luka in Boston, and the Hawks snap the Kings' winning streak. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA, local experts taking you from game to game throughout the National Basketball Association. I am your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. We are ready to recap the action for you from yesterday. We'll start out with the Cavs, who continue to roll as they take home their fourth straight dub yesterday. Locked On Cavs certainly happy with the wins, but more excited to see Cleveland back to playing their brand of basketball.
Hey, Chris Manning here from the Locked On Cavs podcast. After the Cavs have picked up a fourth straight win, this time beating the Damian Lillard-less Portland Trailblazers. Here's why this win matters for the Cavs. 4 straight is nice, but more importantly, it took care of business. This whole current 4-game winning streak, which is coming off the heels of a 5-game losing streak, has been about the Cavs taking care of business in every which way. They needed to just kind of normalize things, get back on track, play more to their style of basketball after that losing streak where things kind of went awry a bit on the West Coast. They've looked more like the best version of themselves these last 4 games. And in this game in particular, Jared Allen looked a lot more like the finishing monster from last season who made an All-Star team. His numbers are down this year. He only missed 2 shots in this game. A very good Jared Allen performance. Next up is the Bucks, who they lost to in Milwaukee earlier this year by double digits. Let's see if coming off of this winning streak, they do a better job second time around. For more, check out Locked On Cavs.
Coming up, the Bulls take down the Bucks. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by BetOnline, the #1 spot for all of your online sports betting needs. No matter what you want to put your wagers in on, you can do that at BetOnline. Of course, the World Cup is in action right now, and there are some very enticing NFL games this week. And whatever you want to do, just head over to betonline.net. It's where the game starts. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. A back-and-forth game in Indiana last night saw the Timberwolves finally pull away in the second half to get the victory. Our Locked On hosts have more on everything post-game.
The Pacers' winning streak ends at the hands of the Minnesota Timberwolves here in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I'm Tony East, the host of Locked On Pacers, here to tell you why the Pacers lost by 14 to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Because they started the game horribly. It was 27-10, less than 10 minutes into this game. Pacers were down 17 so early. They scored 10 points in the first 10 minutes. For the remaining 38 minutes of the game, the Pacers won. They outscored Minnesota for the remaining 38 minutes of the game. They sort of figured out how to attack Gobert and the paint better on Minnesota. They got a couple more threes to fall. Miles Turner was fantastic in this game, 31 points. He hit 7 threes, was stretching out Gobert. Right, they figured stuff out as the game went along, but they started so poorly they just couldn't overcome it. Minnesota had an answer to every Pacers run. So despite Turner's excellent night, which he's had many of this month, Pacers cannot extend their winning streak. It ends at 5 games, and they are now 10-7. We'll break down the Pacers, Miles Turner's game, and more over at the Locked On Pacers podcast.
The Minnesota Timberwolves are winners of 5 straight games after beating the Pacers on Wednesday night. I'm Ben Beacon with Locked On Wolves. Karl Anthony Towns led the Wolves with 23, 11, and 8, nearly a triple-double. And this was a game the Wolves were up by 5 at halftime, but they should have been up by at least 15. Turnovers were a major issue for the entire game for the Wolves. They actually finished with 23 miscues in this game, but especially in the first half. The lead should have been much greater. In the third quarter, Miles Turner went off. It was threes. It was dunks. But the Pacers would punch. They'd hit a 3. The Wolves would punch back and hit a 3. The Pacers would get a massive dunk and get the crowd into it. The Wolves would silence the crowd with a dunk on their end. The Wolves punched right back throughout the second half. And ultimately, Towns was a huge part of that third quarter surge that put the Wolves even further ahead. And the Wolves were able to pull away in the fourth to come up with their 5th straight win, beating a team that had previously won 5 straight in the Pacers. So a fantastic road win for the Wolves. We'll break it all down in the postgame podcast. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Wolves for all things Timberwolves.
The Hawks able to step up at home and take down a Red Hawk Sacramento team on Wednesday. Locked On Hawks tells you how Atlanta got the job done.
Hello friends, my name is Brad Rowland, coming to you live from State Farm Arena, where the Atlanta Hawks knocked off the Sacramento Kings this evening. The Hawks stopping the 7-game winning streak for Sacramento, and Atlanta was really good in the first half on offense, scored 72 points, a season high. The second half was excruciating in a lot of ways for the Hawks. They shot 4 of 23 from 2-point range after halftime. That is pretty tough to do against this Kings team, but the Hawks were able to get enough stops and withstand a tired Kings team that came from Memphis the night before. So we'll get into all of this and more on Locked On Hawks podcast. But the Hawks are now 11-7, and that's a positive step after the first 18 games of the season.
Pre-game, Luka Doncic anointed Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown the best duo in the league. They certainly lived up to those expectations last night. Tatum with 37, Brown had 31 points. It was all too much for Dallas to overcome. Locked On Mavs and Locked On Celtics go over a really good one from Wednesday night.
The Dallas Mavericks lose 125-112 despite a monster game from Luka Doncic putting up 42 points, national television against Jason Tatum, and it just wasn't enough from the Mavs. For Dallas, I think this is a little wake-up call. There is a gap between the title contending teams in the league and where Dallas is at. They had a good second half. They put some things together. Christian Wood, Luka Doncic playing together a lot more in the second half. They upped the ante on defense, but it just was never enough. Boston scores over 100 points before the fourth quarter even started. And, wasn't enough. Dallas falls short. We're going to talk about all the reasons they fell short, but also some positives coming out of the fourth quarter. Coming up on Locked On Mavs later tonight.
A full-strength Brooklyn squad took full advantage in Toronto as the Raptors still deal with their own injury woes. Locked On Nets goes over a night where all the Brooklyn starters shared the wealth.
Doug Norrie, Locked On Nets coming at you following a 112-98 victory by the Brooklyn Nets over a depleted Toronto Raptors team. It comes on the heels of the Nets with an embarrassing loss to the Sixers on Tuesday night. They are able to bounce back going into Toronto. Toronto without most of their key players here, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes among the group not playing. But Kyrie Irving turned in 29 points on 86% true shooting. It was 11 for 16 from the field. Ben Simmons, another game where it looks like he's turned the corner. Nets are able to claw within a game of 500, so things could be turning around here. Tide could be turning a bit. We are going to be breaking down this win and more over on the Locked On Nets podcast.
Chicago Bulls fans extra thankful right now as their team has beat the two best teams in the league in back-to-back games. Locked On Bulls goes over the accomplishment, while Locked On Bucks talks through a rare loss for Milwaukee.
The Bucks suffer a rare loss against the Chicago Bulls, it has to be said. My name's Kane Pittman, the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. Bucks go down 118-113 on their home floor. Giannis has 36, matched by DeMar DeRozan, one of the great Buck killers. He had 36 points as well, but there's two areas that stand out to me. Giannis went out of this game with 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. The Bucks were leading 75-73. By the end of the period, they were down 90-83, a 17-8 run. That proved pretty pivotal and put a bit of a challenge in front of the Bucks. Secondly, the three-point defense. Chicago attempting 28 per game this season. They got up 42 in this game and hit over 40%. Perhaps the Bucks slipping into some old habits and over-helping a little bit. We're going to break it down on Locked On Bucks.
Zion Williamson is back on the court and making his presence felt in a very big way as New Orleans never trailed against the Spurs. Locked On Pels goes over a big night for the big man and a New Orleans win.
Zion Williamson still good at basketball, but the Pelicans may have found the right balance with him and Brandon Ingram, and that will only make their top 5 offense better. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans. 32 points on 18 shots, 11 rebounds, and a 19-point win over the San Antonio Spurs for Zion Williamson. He scored posting up, driving from the perimeter, through 4 defenders at the free throw line. When he's playing like that, he's near unstoppable. But at times, the Pels have struggled to balance him and Brandon Ingram. Yet tonight, you saw much more of a two-man game between them. Screens being set for each other, feeding the hot hand. Brandon Ingram ended up with 10 assists, a double-double on the night. The Pelicans already have a top 5 offense, and that balance is what they've been looking for. If they can run those two through actions with each other, that's just going to make them one of the best teams in the league.
The Pistons were able to turn their first road win into a winning streak away from home as they took down the Jazz in Utah last night. Locked On Pistons tells you how Detroit has found a way to turn things around, while Locked On Jazz goes over a 2-game skid.
So let me get this straight. In the middle of a Western road trip for a team that was the worst in the league standing-wise, one of the worst, if not the worst defensive team in the league, in the middle of a Western road trip where you lose Cade Cunningham, you lose Sadiq Bey, and you lose Isaiah Stewart. You play against 2 teams on their home floors, 2 teams that you haven't beat in a long time on their home floors. Back-to-back on a back-to-back. This game, you go without Killian Hayes in the second half, and you win both these games? What's going on? What's going on out here? The Detroit Pistons beat the Utah Jazz, go on their win streak, 2-game win streak, on a Western road trip on a back-to-back against the Denver Nuggets and the Utah Jazz, two of the top teams in the Western Conference right now. Kevin Knox, I guess. I got nothing. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Andrew Wiggins had his night to shine last night against the Clippers, and Locked On Warriors has more on the champs who continue to dominate at home.
The Golden State Warriors' home winning streak is now at 7. I'm Cyrus Satsas with your Locked On Warriors, Locked On Now recap of the defending world champions continuing their winning ways at home, handily defeating the number 2 defense in the NBA, the LA Clippers, 124-107. This was a well-balanced performance from the Warriors, led by Andrew Wiggins, who had a season-high 31 points. Stephen Curry added 22 points, 9 assists, and 6 rebounds, while Draymond Green, who played again with the second unit with positive results there, added 12 assists to go with his 9 points and 7 rebounds. Klay Thompson added 18 points. The Warriors next play the Utah Jazz Friday at home. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs.
That's all for today on Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Make sure you go and subscribe to Locked On NBA and your team's Locked On podcast. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm Kanani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.